Continuing on with the nose, just going to reinforce, without getting too dark, the sides of the nostrils. And some of the shadows. Whoops, that has too much water. Too much water is not a good thing when we're working in this impasto style. I'm going to come in with a bit of a darker area on the sides, the corners of the nose, these areas that I've kind of lightened up a little bit. I'm trying to move with the volume of the form that I'm describing. So that means that my brush strokes, if you were thinking about every single form of the face, every fold having little arrows running down it. Like imagine if you took a flat piece of paper, drew a bunch of straight lines on it, or a flat sheet with a bunch of straight lines, and then pulled it over a face, the way those straight lines would curve, that will be the volume. So I'm following the volume with my brush strokes. Getting more contouring. And some darker contouring on this side. You'll find that almost always in a portrait, one side of the nose will have darker shadows along the sides of it than the next. That's the side opposite to the side where the light is hitting. So just getting that variation can be really important. And also feathering these marks. At this point, you can start to see some of the little risky areas of working with acrylics when you work too slowly with them, which are these little lumps and bumps which show up as the paint is drying. So having your colors pre-mixed and be able to just place them side by side and feather them together is a good way to get a consistent surface for your portrait. And I like using the flat brush when I want to blend because it has a larger surface area and is less likely to leave little stripes in the paint. And I can move back in with the highlight now. So this is a very yellowed value of white, the very lightest areas. There's a teeny bit of light just catching the side of the nostril. Moving on to the upper eyelids, the crease right on the upper eyelid is going to be more pronounced than the one on the lower eyelid. So this crease up here is going to be dark, so I'm just going to darken that. And then there will be some contouring along the eyelid, where on the inner sides it's going to be a bit darker, and then moving towards the middle where the light hits, it's going to be lighter. And now I'm going to move into the tone of the whites of the eyes, which aren't really white. They're actually going to be gray. They're going to bounce whatever surrounding colors are around them back into themselves. So whatever your background is going to be bounced back into the whites of the eyes, making what's usually a gray tone. The gray tone is going to be darker as you move towards the corners of the eyeballs. And I'm just going to, so I'm mixing together two values, one darker gray, one lighter gray. We'll go over this mixing in class. I'm not using black in mixing my grays. We're going to be mixing grays from colors because black can muddy up, especially with skin tones, the tone of the skin. And I'm just going to start painting the darker values on the inner sides of the eyeball, and then moving in with the lighter gray towards the middle. And I'm going to go all the way over the iris so that I can get some contouring and shadows before I work in those details, because no matter how much work you put in the rest of the painting, the viewer's always going to focus in on the eyes. So eyes can really make or break a portrait. The good news with this is that you can get away with doing less if you just do really detailed eyes. But the bad news is that poorly defined eyes, especially asymmetrical eyes, are really going to distract the viewer from anything that you've done good in the portrait. Not to be too dark about it. So now coming in with, there's going to be a little shadow over the top of the eye created by the upper eyelid. I'm going to do that. And now I'm going to wait for this to dry. Just try to make this as consistent as possible. So try to make this not very streaky. As we move downwards. So now we're going to think about the inner eyelid. It can be hard to get these details with acrylic because acrylic's not particularly conducive to super fine details, but there will be a darker shadow on the inside of the eye and a little bit below the eyelid. So just like what we started with, you might even still see some of the initial marks when we were doing our basic light and dark study underneath the skin tones here. And I'm just kind of lightening up as I move towards the sides of this little bulge under the eyes. I'm also at this point going to come in with the tear ducts. For these, I'm going to add a little bit more red to a neutral skin tone. You might want to wait and make sure your paint's dry before you do this, but I'm just going to dot that in. The tear ducts. Now while I wait for this to dry, I'm going to move along to the lips and the upper lip area. I'll start with the philtrum, the ducts right above the nose that form two little areas of highlight, one of which is going to be slightly catching the light and moving more towards one side than the next, and the other of which is going to taper more towards the side of the upper jaw. And while I'm here using these light colors, I'm just going to lighten up some of this highlight here. So you can see that as the paint dries, it does tend to darken in areas as it picks up the colors underneath it. That effect can be reduced through the use of thicker layers, but it's always sort of like, you know, you have to decide whether you want to do thicker layers and risk getting them wrong, or do thinner layers and have to adapt on how the paint's drying. Moving in with some feathering here. And there will be a little highlight just along the top of the lips. Okay, I'm going to start by the line in the middle of the lips, and now I'm going to mix together a rosier color. So using a different red or more purpled red, I'm using a cooler red here to glaze a different tone over a different color, a different hue over the tones I've put down. So the lips are mainly going to be the same color as the rest of the skin, but with a tiny bit of tonal variation. Sorry, color variation. I keep mixing those two up. I'm making the sides of the lips where we marked out the volume a bit darker because the light's going to hit more as I move towards the center of the lips. All in all, the upper lip is going to be darker than the lower lip. Oops. You can use more purple tones as you move towards the very sides of the lips to add more shade. So by adding a little bit of blue and a little bit of brown, we can get the sides. I'm going to create a little core shadow on the lower lip coming across here before moving in with some more red tones. It's not quite dark enough. I'm going to just come in with red here and hope it picks up the underlying colors I've put down as it dries. And now I'm just tapering that color as I move towards the center of the lips where I'm going to put a highlight. There's so much you can do with the lips in terms of color and tone that sometimes it can be hard to decide like how much detail to put in. But for now, I'm just gonna have this highlight here. Come back with some warmer skin tone for the upper side of the lip. And get the shadow on the underside. Bit more contouring while the paint is wet, and back towards the middle of the lips with a dark brownish red. And I'll come back at the very end with some colors darkened with black for the very darkest values, but I really don't want to mix those in too early, or I risk just muddying up any colors that mix with the black tone. So black can be good if you want to dull things down on purpose, or at the very, very end to accent some of the darkest areas. I'll do a little bit of work on the sides of the lips while I wait for those to dry, just to get some of the contours made by the muscles surrounding the mouth. Now I'm going to move back towards the highlight on the forehead. I'm just basically biding my time here as I wait for different elements of the painting to dry. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the eyebrows. So here's where I can start using a bit of the black as a darker value. So let me just get that. Going to mix a bit of black with brown. And start to feather in the upper eyelid. I'm moving my brush in the direction that I imagine the eyebrows are going to move into, but you don't want to make any of these strokes too big because they're all going to be proportionately too large. So we're not using the brush strokes to make individual hairs or like hairy eyebrows. We're just following the general form. while I have this black here, the black-brown mix, I'm going to come in and do the nostrils. The nostrils are usually much smaller than you think they are. So they're just going to be tiny little areas. I mean, the area of shadow in the nostrils. The nostrils, the size is one thing, but the shadow is usually a lot smaller than you think it is. And then just mixing a bit of this black with some rose. I'm also going to use it to help define this little shadow on the side of the nose, which is getting lost. I'm also going to use a black rose mix on the sides of the lips. And mixing with red, a lot of red, in the center of the lips. A little bit of brown for the underside of the chin, where the shadow's hitting. I'm going to add a tiny bit of black to that. And finally on to the eyes. I'm going to mix some brown with a little bit of the black and a little bit of yellow ochre to create a tone for the irises. And as I move towards the top of the iris, I'm going to add a little bit more black because there's going to be a shadow from the upper eyelid. I'm not going to do individual eyelashes, but I am going to darken up using that black-brown mixture, the upper eyelid, to indicate the lashes. just adding a little bit more definition along the corners of the upper eyelid. Okay, now I'm going to come in with black for the pupils. Quickly pause to hair dry this.